welcome back to part 1.1 of the video that I just released, where we went over how to test for the 3-minute all-out test and basically how to calculate the corresponding variables that then allow you to map out the whole exercise training intensity spectrum for your specific athlete or client. So here we are, we've calculated critical speed and other corresponding variables from our 3-minute all-out test, and now we have an awesome comprehensive map of all of the exercise domains that we can use to elicit different adaptations to improve strength and weaknesses of athletes. So what's really cool about this is that it's sport specific, because remember, we can test these athletes in almost any type of modality, whether that be rowing, ski ergometry, running, swimming, cycling, you name it. It's also physiologically specific. Instead of using just percent of heart rate max and percent of VO2 max, that some would argue that is not as much of a viable option of prescribing accurate training as using more submax anchors. It also includes those submax anchors and then can thus tell you these domains at which different perturbations of things like oxygen uptake and lactate occur. So the last thing is you can prescribe really any kind of training now that you have this map. You can prescribe really low intensity stuff, moderate intensity stuff, or you can prescribe more HIIT training things, or even sprintability or repeated sprintability, and then try to get adaptations within all these domains to then improve upon your athlete or client, or the athlete or client, as best as possible. So first, I'm going to show you a definition of what HIIT training is according to the Science and Application of High Intensity Interval Training, which defines high intensity interval training as exercise consisting of repeated bouts of high intensity work performed above the lactate threshold or critical speed/power, interspersed by periods of low intensity exercise or complete rest. What's cool about this is, to my knowledge, the two guys that, well, I don't know if it's one or two, but the main guys that came up with the 30-15 test were also responsible for the creation of this book, along with countless experts in the field of exercise physiology. However, they still use critical speed and power as the bottom, lowest speed or lowest work rate that you use, and then go up from there to prescribe HIIT training. So this gives you a very easy visual to say, hey, what was my score on the test for my athlete or the athlete? And then, okay, well, if I want to do HIIT training, I have to go harder than that, at least. So you'll see that I highlighted a few things just based off this definition. I like to keep my jargon clear and consistent. So when they say high intensity work, I would replace that with severe and extreme intensity work, or severe to maximal sprint speed intensity work. And as far as the lactate threshold or critical speed, in this case, I think what they're actually hinting at is the maximal lactate steady state, which has been thought to be along the lines of the same work rate, or occur at the same work rate as critical speed or critical power. That's a debate for another day. And then the last thing is interspersed with periods of low intensity exercise. Well, truly, all you need to do to recuperate someone's energy after doing a bout in this training zone right here, or the severe and extreme domain, is just go below critical speed in this case. So that could be actually a heavy intensity or a moderate intensity rest period. So basically, with all this knowledge, you can take, and all this information, you can take some of the values you get to mathematically predict times that athletes will get for certain distances or certain speeds or things like that, so you can prescribe workouts that are not only targeted towards specific adaptations of either anaerobic, aerobic, or musculoskeletal system, but also are applicable and possible for the athlete to achieve. So before I go into the mathematical ideas of this, I just want to clear up the assumption about what the mathematical models are saying. So basically, the idea is when you prescribe HIIT training, there's an athlete and they're fully charged in the beginning. And then when you do the first interval, their battery is a little more drained, and then their battery is a little more drained. And then finally, the end of your HIIT training session should lead to like a maximal heart rate. And also, however, you shouldn't push past that point because then you're just doing inefficient work depending on what your goal is. So the whole idea is that this D prime or W prime, or to keep it in simple terms, the anaerobic work capacity, which don't quote me on that because it's not that simple, is basically the backbone to understanding how we can predict speeds and distances that athletes will go for a given prescription of HIIT training. So if you want to pause this real quick to read all this, because it's kind of busy, please do so. However, I'm just basically going to go over an example of if I was a coach and how I'd use these mathematical prediction models to determine what my targets were for my athletes. So what I'm going to do on a certain day is have an interval that has a fixed distance, but I don't know how fast the athletes will actually complete that distance. So athlete number 1 has a critical speed of this and a D prime of this. And so we can tell that they have a little more anaerobic speed capacity than athlete 2, which has a lower D prime but a higher critical speed. So I'm guessing from the higher critical speed, their VO2 max is also probably higher. So the workout that I want to prescribe is a 4x400 meter at a 60 to 80% depletion of the battery, or D prime in this case. And I need to know how long I should exercise the athletes, or what the expected time for the 400 meter sprint should be. So what I'm going to do is take this equation right here, which these are really all the equations that I know of to prescribe or predict performance outcome measures. So basically, I'm just taking this equation and then applying it to the information that I have up here. So as you can see, the time that the person should come in at 400 meters would be the distance, which would be 400 meters, minus D prime multiplied by the depletion of D prime I want, which is 60 to 80%, and then all divided by critical speed. At the end of all that, using the range of 60 to 80% depletion, athlete 1 needs to come in about 84 to 94 seconds, and athlete 2 needs to come in 75 to 88 seconds. Please note that these are mathematical calculations, and so sometimes variables like the numbers you get can look a little strange. And at least in my personal experience, 200 to 300 meters seems to be like the lower limit before the values look really weird, like it tells you you need to be running at 13 meters per second or something like that, something impossible. And then also below 30 seconds, calculating for like speed or distance or something like that starts to get a little strange as well. Keep in mind that there is more to this that I do not know of. And in fact, I think the mathematical side is probably something that I'm probably most limited on understanding. So this is definitely not all that's possible with using critical power or critical speed. However, this is what I know to show you at this time. So, all right, so again, let's say that you looked at that math and like me, you were like, man, that's really complicated. I don't know if I can do that. Well, no worries. You can actually do prescribe training just from knowing these little landmarkers, right? So basically knowing what adaptations come with each of these domains, you can understand, okay, well, what training am I going to prescribe? I want to improve VO2 max. Well, it probably means you need to work at or close to VO2 max. I want to improve stroke volume. I want to improve the resting heart rate or recovery of my athletes, possibly more so close to the moderate and heavy domains, things like that. I want to improve the maximal sprint speed of my athletes. We're going to work way up here towards the top end of the extreme domain, so on and so forth. But in an example where you actually want to predict how long it's going to take your athletes to perform, all you'd have to do is, for this example, say we're on a basketball court and we want to do shuttles of 140 meters, or roughly 5 lengths of the basketball court, and then we want to give them 30 seconds of active rest. So the team average is, after you've done the 3-minute all-out test, the speed of VO2 max is going to be 5 meters per second. And the lactate threshold, or this lower threshold down here, is going to be 2.5 meters per second, okay? So the target time would simply be the distance you want divided by the team average. And based off that, you have like a little error. So it could be anywhere from 38 seconds to 28 seconds, right? The error I applied and why I only made it slower was because of change of direction. So if you did a continuous test or continuous running test with these athletes on a track, and then you came inside and did a change of direction shuttle workout, you have to account for the time it takes them to actually change direction. So in that, I just made a little buffer of possibly the time. And you can, of course, change this time accordingly once you actually watch your athletes, or the athletes' times in real time, and then determine if this is too hard or too easy for them. As far as the rest goes, you would just need to jog, and jog like you mean it, not like a walk with arms pumping, because really this lower intensity is, it's pretty low in most cases. 2.5 meters per second, that'd be pretty low. It'd be pretty easy for an athlete to simply jog this pace for the remainder of the 30 seconds before they started their next bout again. So, in summary, hope this video helped you get an idea for how you can use a 3-minute all-out test and or critical power in the prescription of any type of conditioning training for your athletes or athletes. Specifically, I just want to reiterate why this is such a good test. You can really test any mode, any modality. You can test the athletes extremely fast. You can then map the athlete's exercise intensity spectrum. Then from mapping that spectrum, you can prescribe really any kind of training that has specific adaptation that you desire. And then you can use equations, or you don't have to use equations. And of course, my personal favorite is that this is extremely evidence-based. And the idea of critical power itself has been around since 1965 and is getting better every day. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions about this or anything in the prescription of conditioning for athletes, please send me an email, and be on the lookout for part 2, where I actually break down a real life example of taking an individual athlete and a team of athletes through this test and then prescribing a conditioning program to improve certain aspects of their game, utilizing all the steps that I just laid out in these 2 videos. Thanks for watching.